Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the third and final installment of a series we're doing called Preparing for Aging. If you missed the first two, they are on our website, njaaw.org, under the events and past events page. So we invite you to go back and watch them, share it with friends, tell other people about it, because we've covered a lot of really good information as we've been doing this. So we have three guests with us today to talk about understanding solo aging. And this panel was so popular at our conference in May, we thought it would be a great one to repeat for everybody. So we have with us Carl Archer, who's from Archer Law Office, also a member of the board of New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well. Adrian Allotey, an elder care strategist from You Are Not Alone Elder Care, and Shana Siegel, an elder care lawyer from Norris McLaughlin firm. I'm going to turn it over to them. We are recording this and we'll share it with you afterwards. We will also share the slides with you. And as we go through, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We're going to be monitoring them, and we're also going to have time for questions and answers at the end. So with that, I turn it over to our speakers.
So as we all know, our society places a significant value on autonomy, self-determination, and the ability to control one's own destiny. Unfortunately, as we age, sometimes we encounter life's challenges, such as chronic illness, traumatic events, injuries, and of course, aging has different impacts on our lives as well. And so when we look at the concept of individuals' independence, once these things happen, they come into questioning of how independent can our aging population be? And so if you think about it, what about those adults who face these challenges, but who lack the historical traditional support system, such as a spouse, adult children? Their impact can be even greater. So these individuals who don't necessarily have the spouse or the adult children, or maybe the adult children don't live close by, or maybe they're estranged. Or how about adult children who have special needs? Imagine aging without that support. Imagine how it will look. Imagine how it will appear. Imagine how it affects our aging population. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call solo aging. And it's not a unique phenomenon. There are approximately 22.1 million solo agers in America. That's about 27.27% of our older population who live alone and are childless. So if you look at this, you can proceed. Next slide. So if you look at this chart here, you'll see that, excuse me, older adults who have children are more likely to live with a spouse or with their adult children, while those who are childless are more likely to live alone. About 63% of parents live with a spouse compared to only 40% of childless adults. And over a quarter of parents live with a child, while very few childless adults do. Living with other relatives or an unmarried partner is less common overall, but the biggest difference is in living alone. 40% of childless adults live by themselves, almost double the share of parents. Proceed. Next slide. So if you look at this slide, you'll see what are the challenges of solo agers? Well, we have limited finances and access to healthcare. no caregivers who are readily able to assist with procedures or hospital transitions. There's a delayed care due to lack of support. And again, the risk to autonomy in decision making because the advocates are not in their lives. Why does this even matter? Most aging decisions require a trusted person to act on their behalf, something solo agers often lack. And what do they need? They need strategic planning, trusted advocates, proactive choices for long-term security and well-being. Next slide.
I'm fine with me. Yeah, that.
Shana?
Yeah.
Okay.
So solo agers are optimistic about their quality of life. Next slide, Kathy. So we see here a comparison that AARP did a survey of solo agers versus other older adults. And it found that although that they had a lot of similar fears, but the fears, as one might assume, are greater for solo agers of things that they would be more subject to. So, for instance, they had a greater fear of dying alone. They had a greater fear of being institutionalized against their will, of having a court-appointed guardian, of losing independence. And then you see that other older adults are more likely to have support for managing their affairs. Next slide. But what's really interesting is that even though we saw on the prior slide that there were greater fears of not having support, of being institutionalized, of having a court-appointed guardian, the planning has not been done to address those fears for many of these solo agers. So you see that 77% here of solo agers have done no planning for daily assistance. Only 50% of them have even done an advance directive or any of their legal documents. An even smaller amount have shared that with their doctor. Almost none of them have made a reservation or even really looked into senior living, and very few have done home modification. So we see that even though they have these fears, that most solo agers haven't taken the steps that would really help them address those fears. And that's really what we want to focus on today, is how to take action so that you can kind of address those concerns. Next slide. So again, we see here there's this optimism, but not necessarily followed by a plan. So we have, 50% of people are optimistic, of solo agers are optimistic about their aging. 60% of them value independence, and but they're not necessarily doing those things to be able to keep them independent in the way that they want. Next.
So here we have June. June is a 70-year-old woman who is divorced and has no children. She is an only child and moved in with her father after her mother died. She cared for her father as he struggled with Parkinson's disease and is grieving his recent death. Although June is retired, she still maintains a few close friends from her old job. She also has a close relationship with a woman who has lived across the street from her parents for almost 40 years. Since her father died, June spends most holidays with her neighbor's family. Next slide. And so here you'll see the effects again on the health effects on our solo agers. Sometimes we interchange loneliness with social isolation, but loneliness is feeling alone regardless of how much social contact you have. But social isolation is having little to no social connections. And what are the health risks? Well, it's the increased risk of early death in our solo population, increase as far as dementia. Look at that number there. 29% heart disease, 32% stroke. Of course, these would have an effect on depression, anxiety, as well as suicide. Again, the increase is of deaths. There's a big 68% increase in hospitalization compared to those who are not solo aging, and then 57% of emergency visits. So this study that we looked at shows that those who are 60 plus years old found that solo aging factors, living alone, unmarried, no nearby family, increases again loneliness, depression, and how about that financial strain and health burdens that could absolutely make things worse. Who's even more vulnerable? You have the immigrants, the LGBTQ plus individuals, the racial and ethnic minorities, and then of course elder abuse survivors. Next slide.
So as I mentioned before, we have a group of individuals who is concerned about their future, but maybe don't really have that for whatever reason, are kind of holding back on that planning. We find that, obviously it is anxiety provoking, and I have a lot of solo senior clients, and many of them, they find it difficult to move forward with their planning because they're concerned about who are they going to name, right, in their documents. And so they may not have that push, whereas somebody with adult children, their adult children may be kind of pushing them to do this and getting those documents done. But, there's more of a feeling of, maybe procrastination, maybe fear. But really, the idea of doing this is that it is going to help you address those fears. It's going to help you make sure that the fears that you have don't come true, because without the documents, it's kind of self-fulfilling, right? So obviously the advanced planning, it's going to help you reduce your fear, prevent the crisis, and it really is a dignity issue, and it is an independence issue, because you're putting your wishes into legal language and appointing an agent to be able to implement those wishes. So the only way that your wishes are going to be known and be followed are to have these documents. So we're talking about basic documents like a durable financial power of attorney for financial decisions. We're talking about a healthcare proxy where you name someone to step in and make medical decisions for you, and a living will or advance directive where you state your wishes for healthcare, and specifically often for end of life. And when we see these documents in place, that's what's going to prevent a court-appointed stranger from making choices. Because if we don't have these documents, then you could very well find yourself in a situation where a guardian is appointed by the court in order to act on your behalf if you became incapacitated. The other thing that we find a lot in our practice is individuals who don't have someone named, they will often end up with either under treatment or over treatment. So in their home, they're very often might be a situation where they're not seeing doctors, they're not getting the treatment that's needed. But if they're admitted to a hospital in an emergency, there tends to be over treatment because there's no one there to advocate for them to say, no, they don't in fact want that treatment. And so they end up getting everything possible done, as a means of kind of, the default in our healthcare system. often these individuals will end up staying in a hospital or staying in a facility longer than they otherwise would have to, because again, there's no one to advocate for them. There's no one to deal with the discharge planning. There's no one who has authority to get things in place. So one of the things that I really advocate for with my solo seniors is, yes, the documents, that's super important, but then stepping into that next step of, what do you wish and what steps are you going to take proactively to make sure that you can stay at home if that's what you want, or receive care in whatever environment that you want and given to you by whomever you would want. So it's really about ensuring that your voices are heard. Yeah, go ahead to the next one. So experts recommend that you choose someone as an agent or a fiduciary that is trustworthy, and ideally someone who is a generation younger, someone who's old enough to handle these type of decisions, but young enough that they're not experiencing the same aging issues. And this is, I find, one of the largest barriers for individuals who come to me, reach out to me about the specifics of, oh, I need to get my documents in place, but then they kind of stall because they don't feel like they have anybody that they can name. And so that's really where I can help them to discuss what options are out there, whether that might be a care manager or making other recommendations about what kind of team you might put in place to be able to assist when the time comes. Next. So some of the things that I would speak with clients about would be thinking about some real specifics. So if I have an advance directive, I don't necessarily have to get as specific with mine, because I have had conversations ad nauseum with my husband and my children about what my wishes are, because this is what I do for a living. So I've, told them over and over again what I want. But when you have a solo ager, they haven't had those conversations, or if they had, the people who they've had them with may not be the person who's named. So it may be important to have more specific information in your documents. I would recommend a separate instruction directive, because the healthcare proxy is really that's what names the agent. That's what the medical team needs. They need to know whose signature they can get. But that healthcare agent wants to have something more specific, which would be the instruction directive, that's really going to guide them on what your values are, what your thoughts are with regard to specific treatment. You might have a dementia provision that's going to talk about, what happens if I have dementia, what things I might or might not want. Might focus on, I really encourage people to focus on functionality, because a lot of times there's terms of art that not everybody is understanding the same way. So the easiest way to think of it is, what is quality of life to me, and what functions are important for that quality of life? So if I'm not able to know who my loved ones are, if I'm not able to do certain things on my own, right? Those might be things that are important to me in terms of functionality, and when I might not want a certain treatments. Really important to have backup agents, right? Because a solo ager may have a very close friend who they're going to name, but then something happens to that friend, right? So but of course, that's kind of a catch-22 for a solo ager, is they may not have that full array of individuals. So, hopefully there's kind of a found family that the solo ager has, that they can name a variety of people. But if not, or if they're seeing that a lot of these people are aging along with them, then they might want to have a backup agent that is someone who's younger or a professional. I always encourage individuals, if there's a mental health diagnosis, to fill out a mental health directive, and that can be very powerful, because you can designate what experience you've had with specific medications. You can designate whether, what treatments you would want in a mental health setting as well. It's important to find that there needs to be kind of a link between the financial and the medical documents, because if you've named one person to make medical decisions for you, but someone else has the financial control, well, those two people need to be talking, because the medical person can say, yes, you want a particular treatment, but if the financial person isn't paying for it, then, then there's a conflict, right? So we want to make sure that those two people know each other and are in touch, and that they understand that the financial person understands that they are to defer to what the medical person has said with regard to treatment issues, and potentially placement issues as well. It's important, once you've chosen who your agent is, that you give them the information they need to do their job, right? They need to know who your medical providers are. They need to know what your prescriptions are. Then they need to know your health history. And that means you have to have communication with them on a regular basis, right? Especially if you have medically complex issues. They need to know if you were taken off of one medicine because, maybe you had a negative reaction to it. And so, they make sure that they're not authorizing that in the future. So you really need to kind of have someone that you're going to speak to on a regular basis, and make it a practice to give them updates on all of that information. It's a good idea to educate yourself and your agent on the care options that are available. So that's whether we're thinking about home care, we're thinking about different residential options, or if we're talking about the types of care that might be available for your particular health profile. I am a huge proponent of geriatric care managers. I think that no solo ager, if they can avoid it, should go through this without a geriatric care manager or another type of healthcare advocate. A care manager is generally a social worker or a nurse, and they're someone who is going to be your advocate and really kind of step into, if you think of that more traditional, child that might come to doctor's appointments as a parent is aging, being able to, talk to the doctor and talk things through with them. And, certainly you're going to have whoever your agent has that ability, but having a care manager, a professional who really their full-time job is advocating for their clients, I think is really invaluable. And often, your healthcare agent may not have the time to come to all of your medical appointments, but you could have a care manager who could come to some appointments with you. And, I just think people get much better care and are much more likely to be able to stay in the environment they want, whether that's home or assisted living, if they have retained a care manager. Of course, it's a financial question, but if there is the ability, I think it's really the best option. And I see someone ask, can the agent and the care manager be the same person, or is it recommended to have both? If you are going to have if you do not have someone in your personal life who you would name as your agent, then many care management agencies will do that. So you can have that individual step in, and I have done that with a number of with my solo ager clients. I've recommended that, and they've gone on to name their care manager as their agent. There were a couple of other questions related to that. Where can we find a good care manager? Well, there is the Aging, Adrian, help me with the name of the Aging Life Care Association. That's it. The Aging Life Care Association is the care management association, and I think that that would be the first place I would look. Certainly, I think Adrian and I sort of have people who we regularly refer to, but Aging Life Care Association would have a directory. ALCA, correct. And cost, it's going to be on an hourly basis, and I wouldn't want to put forth what their hourly rate would be, but I think it is money well spent. And generally there would be a retainer agreement that you would sign. But you're really would be hiring them now for in the future when that need occurs. Okay, enough about that. Next. So when we talk about practical considerations for financial, I think one of the things that I see a lot of with solo agers, unfortunately, these days is financial exploitation. So I think it's really important to draft a power of attorney, especially for solo agers, to really, address the issues of exploitation. So we might set parameters for how and when that document would be released to an agent. So, you might not want that document just kind of hanging around, that it could be used at any point. You might consider having multiple agents so that you've got some checks and balances. You've got somebody who is going to maybe receive statements if they're not going to act as your agent. I had a situation where I got involved with a case where a woman had appointed her financial advisor as her POA. And she had some nieces who were interested in helping her, but she was very private and she didn't want to make them power of attorney and she didn't want to share statements with them. Well, it turned out that later the nieces found out that the financial advisor had stolen several $1 million from the woman. If she had only shared statements and allowed them to take a look at the monthly statements, then they would have been able to have caught that in a timely manner and not had to go after the individual after death. I'll often like to limit the powers when we have a situation of a solo ager. And of course, that's very, personal to the situation. Each situation is a little bit different. But if you're naming someone who you don't have, obviously you want the most trust and the most confidence you can in this individual, but there are things that we can do, such as preventing them from self-dealing, from making loans to themselves, or taking out a loan inappropriately. We can limit gifting provisions, things like that. We could mandate that the agent has to account and that there's somebody else, maybe a professional, who takes a look at that accounting, kind of once a year, just to make sure that the agent is acting appropriately. You want to address compensation in the document. So if this is going to be somebody who's going to step in and take over all of your bill pay at some point, perhaps, that maybe this is someone who might, who should receive some compensation, and what should be the compensation for that. You need to decide whether or not this is someone who you would want to serve as your guardian if there was ever a need for a guardian. So there might be a situation that the power of attorney is rejected, or they're not able to do a particular act, and then so a guardianship might be necessary in that case. Provide info to the agent. Yeah, so like I said, with the medical, you need to provide them with the things that they need to know to be able to do their job. So for instance, they need to know where you bank. They need to know what your expenses are. They need to know, simple things like, who does my lawn? Who does all of these, things? If they're going to have to step in and bill pay, they're going to need to know what the bills are. So again, just putting together a little bit of information and being a little proactive with that is going to make it easier if that person is ever called on to step in and have to take over your financial affairs. There is something called a conservatorship, and what a conservatorship is kind of like a court, a power of attorney overseen by a court. It is different from a guardianship, because with a guardianship, you're deemed incapacitated. In a conservatorship, you're voluntarily saying, I want this person to act, but not just as my power of attorney. I want them to be a conservator because either you think that that's more likely to be followed, not have any issues in terms of, bank acceptance or anything like that, or because you want there to be court oversight. And with a conservatorship, there is a requirement to account and to, to file with the court on a regular basis. So that might be something to consider if you're a little bit uncomfortable with a simple power of attorney. Another thing that I'll often recommend for my clients who are solo agers is a revocable trust, like a living trust. Living trusts are very popular. You hear, everybody's heard of Susie Orman, and, she's always saying, oh, everybody should have a living trust. That is typically to avoid probate. They're recommended for that purpose. Probate in New Jersey isn't that big of a deal, but it is a revocable trust also has the advantage of making it very seamless, a transition from you handling your affairs to the next person being able to do so. It also allows you to put in a lot of language that you might not put in a power of attorney. You don't want a 40-page power of attorney, but you might want a trust that outlines how you want your funds to be used, whether that's to keep you at home, to pay for a care manager, for, take care of your pets, whatever it is that you want this person who's going to step into your shoes to be able to do, you would want to put that kind of language into into a revocable trust. So it just is a little bit more detailed and gives a little bit more flexibility to the individual to be able to, act on your behalf. Next.
So here we have Ron. Ron is a 92-year-old widower who lives with and cares for his developmentally disabled son, Mark. Ron's wife died 15 years ago, and he and Mark live alone. Ron worries about Mark's future should he pass away, due to his age and because he has health issues. Most of his friends have either died or retired to a warmer climate, and his nearest relatives are cousins he hasn't seen since he left Puerto Rico 80 years ago. Ron's only regular interactions are with his doctors and his barber. Now keep in mind the difference between isolation and feeling lonely. Here I can only imagine are a combination of two in Ron's life. Next slide.
That's you, Carl.
Okay. So, all right. All right. So if we're talking about documents, okay, and just kind of practically speaking, how we're going to handle legal documents, people want to start talking about a last will and testament. It's probably not the first place that an elder law attorney is going to look. I mean, it is the thing that people come in and talk about, but it tends to be the thing that's really, really critically important for folks. So, what are kind of the spots that you want to hit within that in order to make that work? A last will and testament in terms of just a one sentence thing is, a document that determines where your property and your assets go when you pass away. But you can do a lot more things with it. In addition to naming the heirs and how you want that done, you name the executor or personal representative, executrix. You'll hear all these names thrown around, and they all kind of mean the same thing. It's the person who's going to do what the will tells them to do. You plan for dependents, which this is one of those where you're looking at this and you're saying, well, I want to be able to leave money to somebody, but this person is very young. This person has disabilities. This person is not fantastic with money, whatever the situation is. And then how do you figure out how to provide for planning beyond the grave, so to speak, in order to make sure that you avoid unintended consequences. You know, when I talk about what the goal is for any of these documents, it is to avoid unintended consequences, because everybody plans to retire and nobody plans to get old. So that's you know, kind of where we're at. It's very, very useful to find a funeral agent, language regarding a funeral agent in a will. There's a statute that says that within a will, you are permitted to name a representative to handle your funeral arrangements. And that's handy because in the absence of that, you end up oftentimes having to go search, you know, or you or the funeral home or whoever has to go search for people in an order of priority who are of some familial relationship to you in order to approve of funeral arrangements. And it is not uncommon for those people to either be not involved due to just the fact that people are solo, or sometimes they're not involved on purpose. And so having them involved when they were estranged for the last X number of years of somebody's life doesn't really do it. You know, solo agers very often have what, you know, Shana referred to as found family, right? And so if that's the case, you know, those are the people that that person probably wants making those decisions. And you can put that in a will. And even if the will hasn't gone to probate yet, you can still use that document to have the funeral agent named and administer it. Other things that you want to hit. Wills very often have separate provisions for personal property. You'll see something that has a title like a memorandum for the disposition of tangible personal property. So tangible personal property means what I would refer to as stuff. Jewelry, furniture, art, other valuables like that. I believe you can do something with motor vehicles in a memorandum, although it's not a great idea. You can't do anything with bank accounts, financial accounts, or real estate with a tangible personal property memorandum. A lot of times people have a priority for dealing with pets, animals. And so there's techniques that you can do to provide for the care and maintenance of a pet after somebody passes away. You know, going beyond that, like the structure of the document takes into account tax things very generally. In New Jersey, there is no inheritance tax to be paid on transfers to spouses and lineal descendants, so parents, children, grandchildren. It gets a little goofy with like step grandchildren and great grandchildren and things of that nature, but like, you know, they're fringe cases. But, you know, if you have a situation where somebody wants to leave money to a brother, a sister, and nephew, and niece, friends, you know, there are substantial inheritance tax consequences in terms of just the way the estate gets administered, in addition to the tax, which is just something that you need to pay attention to. You know, it is not uncommon for people to come in and go, you know, I'm leaving everything to my niece, and everything is, you know, I'm leaving everything on the beneficiary designation, and I'm going to name my son as the executor because he has all the money, and it doesn't, or, you know, he has lots of money and he's fine. And it turns out that you leave your son a big fat mess because there's a bunch of tax, but he doesn't have any assets to pay it, and the estate is responsible for it. It just ends up making it a mess. You know, things that are less commonly in a will, things like keys to things and access to passwords and computers and safe deposit boxes and things like that. That's all kind of logistical stuff that goes with the estate planning. It is less commonly thrown into the will, but it's stuff that is incident to the will. If you're sufficiently organized where you can keep a list of assets, or a client can keep a list of assets with the will, it's going to cause a lot less aggravation because people are going to know what phone calls they have to make. Kathy, I'll take the next slide. You know, Shana had mentioned an RLT, the Revocable Living Trust. The idea with this is, you know, the assets go into this trust. The senior, the person who creates the trust, can do whatever they want with the assets in the trust. They can put them in, they can take them out, they can dispose of them, spend them, add to them. They can do anything they want. And the nice thing about one of those trusts, when they're funded correctly and they're used correctly, is that you name a backup trustee and the person can just step in, and they step in almost immediately. And you're not fussing about with getting the government involved and so on. And especially if you have a situation where there's property in multiple states, in multiple jurisdictions, it saves a lot of aggravation. The trust can be as detailed as a will can be, about all the things I mentioned with the will. And it can handle distributions after death. That's what the successor trustee can do. You know, if there's issues where there are questions about people, you know, about management and about, you know, kind of who's watching the person who's handling this, you can require an accounting. You can have somebody else as a third party who's involved, who's, you know, as we were talking about before, getting the statements to make sure that nothing crazy happens. A person's usually called a trust protector. And this kind of an arrangement is not a probate arrangement. You don't get the government involved with it, which has value for some people. If in New Jersey, it's really not that big of a deal, but you know, certainly it's a selling point for people who want this kind of a device. Take the next slide, Kathy. All right. So there's a question in the chat Adrian put up that it doesn't directly apply to the things I said, but I'll answer it anyway. Does a power of attorney expire when a person dies? And the answer is yes. A general durable power of attorney for finances is effective, you know, preferably immediately, remains effective during a period of disability for a person. But the power of attorney in question, that document, ceases to become effective upon the death of the person who signed it. It is at that point that all of the provisions in the will become operative, or in an RLT. If there's a revocable living trust, then, you know, that's the successor trustee presumably at that point then gets involved. So, you know, that's where the transition tends to happen. All right, am I still going here? Yes, Shannon, you're nodding your head. You're muted, so I'm just okay. Fine. All right, good. That's fine. I'm enjoying the sound of my own voice today, so that works. So, listen, long-term care is ridiculously expensive, and the long-term care system is a conveyor belt, and the idea with the conveyor belt is that there are institutional incentives to keep people kind of uninformed and scared about what is going on, because there are lots of rights and safeguards that are in place for them, but they're stuck in federal and state regulations and laws. And they're inconvenient for the people who are providing the care. And I'm being very cynical when I am saying that, but like, for those of us who are advocates for the aging population, so people, especially people who are solo, you know, you find that it's just people telling you, well, you have to do things. And I tell people, just because somebody tells you a sentence and it ends in a period doesn't make it a fact. You know, people just don't understand what their care options are, what the payer source options are. They don't understand how long-term care insurance works. They don't understand how what Medicare covers, what Medicaid covers, how to get there. And the fact of the matter is that they're the ones, the solo aging population is the ones that need it, because they're not likely to have the same support system that somebody in a larger family construct is going to have. You know, a little bit of education goes a long way in trying to maintain whatever whatever independence that they have. You know, this is where having an advocate helps. You know, Shana and I are elder law attorneys, and we know how the games get played. We know how a lot of this stuff goes. We talk to clients all the time in order to help with that. But I'm going to echo what Shana said, is that, you know, we're not, you know, lawyers are great, you know, such as we are, but we are not care managers. We're not, you know, we don't provide that kind of boots on the ground stuff. And so geriatric care managers are amazing in that area. I mean, you know, financially it can be difficult, and it requires a level of self-awareness, which is kind of difficult for people. But, you know, having a care manager in place, just like having an attorney in place and having planning in place, makes things less bumpy as they go along. And it does feel like you're facing some things, but the flip side of it is that it gives you the ability to manage changes without there being these massive jolts. All right, I'll take the next slide, Kathy. The only thing I'll add that's on this slide is that you know, people have concerns about access to justice and access to legal advice. And, you know, while I think that attorneys are not cheap and whatever, but if you find yourself in a position, or you have a client who's in a position where, you know, the private attorneys are really not a possibility, there are very often legal resources available through senior centers, through legal services in New Jersey, or similar legal aid places, or several of the law schools have elder law or estate planning clinics, and those are really, really helpful. And so I recommend those highly for people as well. Take the next slide. Okay. So Adrian, I think there was advice that we could skip this one, right?
Yeah, I can only imagine that there are a lot of questions coming up, so.
All right, go
No.
ahead. All right.
All right. So, so as I mentioned before, elder exploitation has really exploded, particularly since the pandemic. At least 20% of seniors, and I think that is very low. Estimates are, you know, $36 billion in losses. Every single day, I feel like I'm getting a call about some elder exploitation related issue. A lot of the risk factors, they do align with factors that solo agers have, characteristics that solo agers have. Being older, living alone, being isolated. Often we'll see the mental status, whether they're suffering from depression or grief or just loneliness. Cognitive impairment, and kind of early cognitive impairment, and dependence on caregivers is very common, and a lack of family oversight, because no one's going to necessarily identify the exploitation. Next. So we've talked about a lot of these things, but just kind of summarizing here and adding a few more. A good, strong power of attorney document or a revocable trust can really be helpful to deter exploitation. Having a trusted contact with your financial advisor. So if your financial advisor or your accountant are concerned about a transaction or something that's happening, very often the banks, accountants, financial advisors are the first people to see these things. And if there's someone that you've established as a contact that they can go to, or if someone else, as we've mentioned, is receiving a second set of statements, so there's a second set of eyes on it. For individuals who really don't have anyone in their lives that they trust, I find that working with a professional, there are professionals called daily money managers, and that is far preferable to working with someone who you maybe don't trust, or a neighbor, or someone, you know, who there's more of a more limited association with. I find so many people, they start working with their neighbors. And, you know, sometimes that works out wonderfully and they're very trustworthy, but sometimes not so much. Though there are professionals that will do that and who will come and sit down with you and do your bills with you. We always recommend that, you know, a lot of things can be set up on auto payment. And if you do have somebody involved, that you might have a separate bill pay account, so that maybe that individual who is stepping in and helping you pay your bills and just has access to that account, but not to the larger accounts where, you know, your investment accounts, where the bulk of your savings are. I know when I go in to see clients, I often will find documents and mail everywhere. And one of the things I always say is, well, if I'm seeing this, that means that the handyman, the maid, the home health care worker, your neighbor, all also have access to these documents. So it's really important to shred your your papers if you don't need them, or store them away if they are something that you need. Don't just leave paper sitting out that has, you know, your personal information on it. It's really a big risk factor. Next. So one of the things that, and this is someone who's written on this subject, one of the things I really advocate for with my clients is being intentional and really planning ahead, being proactive as much as possible. Because if most people want to age at home, most people know what they want it to look like, but it isn't how things end up. I think it's something in like 70-something% of people end up dying in an institutional setting, and that's not what they want. And generally the reasons are that they haven't planned ahead. They haven't laid out the action steps to get them where they want to be, right? So some of the action steps that you can think about are considering a home that's going to fit your needs in the future, advocating for more age-friendly design, build a trusted team of people who you can rely on when you need to, talk early and often about your care preferences and your values with the people who are important to you, plan your legacy, and reject ageism. This is something that is not, you don't have to fall into a certain pattern. Aging is natural, but you can control what your life looks like as you age. Next.
So one of the things that when I go into homes and families, I always think in terms of the emotional and mental and spiritual support that's needed. And so we already talked about the planning, of course, but how about developing relationships, cultivating friendships? Shana mentioned the neighbors, and so that's a great place. They can keep your eyes on you. You can keep your eyes on them, and you could just build that relationship. And then, of course, we all know about the local activities, senior citizens, and there are also homes here. We mentioned the village to village networks where, you know, seniors come together, and resources and education and expertise is shared amongst them. Again, keeping them, you know, active and informed and having that sense of community. And technology, you know, using video calls, social media, just to keep those relationships together. In that way, you don't feel so isolated. Next slide. So we would, oh, there it goes. We would be not the best presenters if we didn't leave you with some resources. And so again, we talked about the Aging Life Care Association, the Conversation Project. That's where it's a toolkit where it discusses and shares and shows you how to have those conversations, as well as putting those documents about end of life. We all know that the AARP is our friend. You can get a lot of information there. And then the five wishes. Again, it facilitates the conversation about end of life wishes and aging with dignity. These are places that you can look up to get more information, but that solo network, elder care locator is a great website to get resources. And then you have not only the national, but the county as well as local councils on aging. And again, there is a lot of support. We know that there's going to reach a point where there are going to be more seniors in America than there will be those who are not seniors. And so some really great books also is Being Mortal, as well as, which is a reflection on, just living a meaningful life. And then we also have the Essentials Retirement Planning for Solo Agers, which is another really great book as well. And I think that we could also, someone put here, can we have the links? We could share the links in the follow-up email that Kathy will share. Right,
I
so
think we have just a couple minutes for questions.
I guess this is the time that they can raise their hand and maybe unmute themselves so it can be more personal.
Yeah, hi everybody. So if you know how to raise your hand, we will call on you. If you don't, you can just wave your hand in front of the screen and we'll find you if you're looking at the screen. Thank you, Adrian, Carl, and Shana for covering all of that. I know there was a lot of information. We will send you the slides and a recording, and I'm also going to put the links from that last slide. We'll put live links in the email so that you can find them directly. No question.
Guys, once again, we've stunned them into silence. Oh no, Donna. Okay, there you are. You have to unmute yourself, hon, but go ahead.
I can unmute. There
Yeah,
you go.
Kathy, I got it. Kathy, I have to leave for another class, but I didn't want to just dodge out and not say I've attended all three. Phenomenal presentations, so on point. And I want to thank you for such quality. It's going to change things for people. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Having said that, Kathy, are there any other events you have coming up?
There are, but first we have Mary Chevette's hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for these three presentations. I agree, they're wonderful. And I'm just wondering how long they will be accessible on your website, because there is a lot of information in it, all three of them.
Forever.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna need it.
So a little plug for our website. When we put it up under events, when we record an event, we put it, if you scroll down, you get to past events, and we have recordings, sometimes slides there, they stay on. And we also have, if you look at the Aging Insights page, we have all of our past recording of Aging Insights episodes there. That goes back years. So there are topics there too that might be of interest. I'll put that in the follow-up email as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to put in, Adrian gave me a nice lead in there. One of the things that we are working on right now at New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well is a call for a multi-sector plan on aging. I put in the chat a link on that, which explains what that is. There's more than 20 states that are doing this. And we're working with a group of partners to raise awareness on aging issues to help us prepare for, it's only 9 years from now where we're going to have more people over 60 than we have kids sitting in our classrooms. And New Jersey has to get ready for that. So it's called Lifelong Strong New Jersey. And if you want to visit that site, we have a pledge to ask the next administration, whoever it is, to adopt and embrace the idea of a multi-sector plan, which will help us get beyond the senior services and really look at things like housing and transportation and affordability in a different way that accommodates an older New Jersey. So I invite you to look at that website, learn more about it. And yes, like somebody put in affordable housing is key. It absolutely is. And also is housing that's just plain affordable and appropriate. So beyond like official affordable program for affordable housing, a wider range of housing issues is something we're calling for. So I invite you to look at that, take the pledge if you're interested. We will not be sharing your name with anyone. You can also sign up for our newsletter where we are putting out every week a, a summary of the news going around locally, around the state, and even nationally that's related to aging. So thank you for that reminder, Adrian. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for joining us. You should be getting this by Monday. You'll get the recording and the slides. And again, please visit our website, look at past events and recordings, and we look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.